Om Gyanaatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Svayamrupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakha Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratashe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, Hare Krishna, everyone. People seem to be lagging a little behind today. We've got a slightly small turnout, but that's all good. I'll proceed anyways. Let me just get the screen up. So, how did we all go with the reading? We got it done? Chapter 9 is of course, as we know, it's a very, it's probably one of the most elevated chapters of the Bhagavad-gītā. Just as a heads up, normally we've been doing in this Bhakti-śāstrī a sort of method by which we're going text by text and then we'll cover general themes. But if time permits, and that is a big if time permits, I'm hoping to do it in circles. Because the 9th chapter is a little deep. So I'm hoping this week, maybe next week, we'll maybe do the whole 9th chapter in a more surface level reading, and then we'll go a little deeper, just because I think this is a very important chapter. But again, that's as much as time permits. So we'll be going a little non-linearly. We will be going over the texts we're discussing today in a bit more depth later on, okay? Today is more just to get the flow of the Gita, and then I'm gonna push it a little harder as we go on. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Are there any questions that anyone had from the reading? Anything that came up? Any concerns? Nothing? Straightforward? Jai. Okay. I'll share my screen then. Admit, people are all trickling in very slowly today. Okay, so actually, no, let's begin at the end of chapter 8. Because, as I like to do, I like to revise. I don't revise because I think you've forgotten it. I like to revise it there at the beginning of each session so we can keeping an understanding of the flow of the Gita. So here we can find this text. We read it out last week, so there's no need to read it out again. But what this text does is something rather interesting in that it summarizes the entirety of what we've heard. Before, right? It sort of gives a trajectory, right? Because what is the name of chapter 9? Who can tell me?
Most confidential knowledge.
Yes, it's the most confidential knowledge, right? And this is a very apt title. This is a title that's given by our acharyas and they've discussed thoroughly. And there's a reason why this is the most confidential knowledge, and there's a reason why this is called that. Because we might wonder, what does confidential knowledge mean, right? Confidential knowledge, well, what comes to our minds when we hear confidential knowledge? What do we all think?
Probably only reserved for the deserving.
Yes, something that's only for the deserving. Sevamrita has written something private, right? These are all things that we can think of, right? something that is reserved away. But isn't this what the whole Bhagavad-gītā is, right? Is Arjuna not deserving from the beginning? Is this not already private knowledge, right? And the answer is yes. All of this in Bhagavad-gītā is very confidential knowledge, right? One needs adhikar, one needs qualification to understand it, right? Maybe some sections of the second chapter are not requiring too much adhikar, right? When we're hearing about rewards of the heavenly planets. But the moment we get on the yoga ladder, we're hearing some knowledge that requires adhikar. However, the 9th chapter is not just confidential knowledge. It is the most confidential knowledge, right? There's an emphasis upon this compared to all of the other knowledge in the Bhagavad-gītā. And therefore, we are going to read this text again, because this text very nicely encapsulates the knowledge we have received so far. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he describes that the first few chapters, what have they described, right? What did we really cover in the first 6 chapters of the Gita? What would we all say was the emphasis of those chapters? What sort of knowledge was it?
Karma?
Sorry?
Karma?
Yes, karma was a big factor in it, but why were we studying about karma? What was Krishna conveying in the first 6 chapters? The knowledge for what?
The knowledge about the soul, Prabhu.
Yes, knowledge about the soul, right? The first 6 chapters are very much theology of man, right? Or theology of human, right? The theology of the person, right? Philosophy of how we understand body and soul. And so this is knowledge, right? And this knowledge is also confidential, right? What did I say? Yes. However, then in these last few chapters, in chapters 7 to 8, what have we learned? We might see the text up here. What have we learned in chapters 7 to 8? In chapters 1 to 6, we've had a long discourse on the soul and the body and liberation. But what are we learning here in chapters 7 to 8?
Knowledge about the Supreme, his energies.
Yes, we've covered that. So we've covered our knowledge of the truth of the personality of Godhead, right? Okay, so we've learned that. And what have we learned is the conclusion of all of that knowledge. When we understand the energies of the Lord, when we understand the Lord, what is the conclusion of that? In chapter 8, we discussed, in chapter 7, we learned a lot about the energies. We learned other things. And then in chapter 8, we learned about attaining the abode of the Lord, right? And how is that abode attained?
It's just remembrance of Krishna.
Exactly, through devotional service, right? So, very nicely, we've seen this sort of outline, right? So this is a more confidential knowledge. It is somewhat confidential, right? It is somewhat confidential to understand the nature between the soul and the body. It is more confidential to realize the method by which we can attain the Supreme Lord, right? But in this 9th chapter, which we'll be going on, so we've discussed all of these other things, right? We've discussed studying the Vedas, performing sacrifices, austerities, all these other things we've already discussed, right? And then we've also discussed, we've learned in the study of Bhagavad-gītā that simply by performing devotional service, one attains all of these, right? The yoga ladder is summarized completely here, right? And yet, we're hearing at the end, he reaches the supreme eternal abode. This would seem to be the most confidential knowledge. But as we go into chapter 9, we will come to the most confidential knowledge, which is confidential even beyond that. And so again, this 9th chapter is very significant. Who can tell me? Alex is saying bhakti is a shortcut. Bhakti is interesting because it's both the shortcut and the only way. And we'll discuss that more as we go along, right? It's the very fortunate position, if you will, of the jivas, that the easiest way is also the best way, right? And in one sense, the only way. I don't know if many of you listened to that audio I sent from His Holiness Shivaram Swami Maharaj in the WhatsApp group. But if you listen to it, he describes there that all other ways can only be effectively performed if bhakti is involved in it as well. There has to be some Mishra bhakti to a degree in order for anything to be successful. Otherwise, there's no real success. So yeah, bhakti on one hand is a shortcut, but on the other hand, it also gives that which all the other methods don't give. This is the point of the yoga ladder, right? That's why one must climb the yoga ladder. Okay, but so as we begin this, how many chapters are there in the Bhagavad-gītā? Who can tell me? This is not a hard question. I'm not doing a trick question. How many chapters? Oh, people are messaging. 18, right? 18 chapters. And which chapter are we about to enter into now? Again, not a trick question.
9.
Chapter 9, right? Chapter 9. And there's a significance to this, right? This 9th chapter is held right in the middle. If I can make a throwback all the way back to the beginning of this course, who can tell me, how do we understand the structure of the Bhagavad-gītā? There's the first section, there's the middle section, there's the last section. What are they?
Yeah.
Yeah, like a sandwich. Yes, yes. Exactly, like a sandwich. The Bhakti burger, right?
Sorry?
I'll just mute Nathai Prabhu. I think he's unintentionally unmuted himself. We have the Bhakti burger, right? And what is the base of the Bhakti burger? It is karma, right? The middle is bhakti and the top is jnana, right? And we can ask the question, why is this the case, right? Why is bhakti not last if bhakti is the height of this yoga system, right? And we might remember, and if we don't remember, I'll remind you, but does anyone remember the analogy that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur uses of the treasure chest in order to describe this, right? Is this if we're remembering this, we'll remember then, why does he say that bhakti is in the middle? Who can tell me?
It started.
I think we had 2 people firing at the same time. We'll let, I'll because Taran Prabhu already answered a question before, we'll hear Sri Mataji this time. And then next time, Sri Mataji will have to give up.
I was just going to say, like, with a treasure chest, you have like the base or like the stand at the bottom, and then you have the treasure in the middle, and then that's covered by like cover or like the top.
Yeah. So but the gems are in the middle, right? So what we find here is we're doing the middle chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā, right? And so we'll find the most confidential knowledge here, right? We will find the most, if we are to take these middle 6 chapters to be the gems which are being held by the other chapters, right? Then we are saying this is the middle of all of it, right? And so when we come to this chapter, we will find that the most precious jewels of the whole Bhagavad-gītā are held here. Now, in one sense, of course, all of the Bhagavad-gītā is full of precious jewels. But again, I'm saying all of this to emphasize this 9th chapter is a very, very sweet chapter. And hopefully when we repeat through it, we'll find I'll be able to pull some of that out a little bit more. But without further ado, let us go then to the 9th chapter. So I will recite the first shlok, and then maybe we can have Rohan Prabhu say the English. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha idam tu te guhya tamam pravakshyama anusuvaye jnanam vijnana sahitam yad gyatva mokshase shubhat.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "My dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you the most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence."
Jai. So we find here, Krishna is engaging in an invocation. We haven't had invocations for many of the other chapters, but again, we must emphasize that this 9th chapter is a very elevated chapter. It's a very esoteric chapter, right? When do we find an invocation? Does everyone know what an invocation is? We find an invocation in Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Janmad yasya, right? So an invocation is when a text speaks of the glories of its own knowledge, right? We know Srimad Bhagavatam has such a wonderful invocation, right? This is the ripened fruit. This is the juice of the ripened fruit of all the Vedic literature. People often, they skim over that, but we have to think, what does this mean for something to be the juice of the ripened fruit, right? It's not just the fruit of the Vedic literature, it is a ripe fruit, right? Overflowing with nectar. And it's not just the ripened fruit, but it is the pure nectar itself, right? We can think with a mango, right? Even if a mango is ripe, there's still all of this skin, there's still that seed in the middle, right? There's all of these things. But if we take just the juice, we've taken purely everything else. There's none of the skin, there's nothing else, there's no seeds. It's just purely the nectar, right? This is the invocation for Srimad Bhagavatam. And that's why when we read Srimad Bhagavatam, it's such a nectarian event. If one tries to read the Rig Veda, you'll be bored. You'll be bored 2 seconds in, right? But when we read Srimad Bhagavatam, we're hearing all of these wonderful pastimes, this wonderful philosophy. Again, it's the juice of the ripened fruit. So then, we are hearing here an invocation. And speaking of the structure of the 9th chapter, I want to take you all through the 9th chapter, and then when we go through our quick second round, then I will break down the structure a little more. But here we find the first 3 texts, just like Srimad Bhagavatam, are acting as an invocation. And what an invocation does is it tells you about the nature of this knowledge. It tells you important things that we must understand, right? And this opening text tells us something rather interesting. Can anyone notice, what does this opening text tell us? Yes, Uma Devi Mataji?
I think not to be envious, Prabhuji.
Sorry?
That Arjuna was not envious of Krishna.
Yes, Arjuna was not envious of Krishna.
Envious of Krishna.
But what does this mean? Krishna says, "My dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me." When we say because, that means something is happening because of it, right? What is happening because Arjuna is never envious of Krishna?
He qualifies to receive this knowledge.
Exactly, right? So what we are hearing here in the opening part of the invocation is we are hearing the means by which one is qualified to hear this most confidential knowledge. So what are those qualifications? There are 2 that I see.
He's not envious of Krishna.
Yes. So we've already discussed that. We've discussed one must not be envious in order to hear properly, right? And envy is very significant because when one engages to learn because of envy, we might think, who is envious? I'm not envious. I'm not envious at all, right? But these higher knowledge, these points are used quite often for envy. Often we'll hear people diving into very, very high truths, right? I'll never forget, once there was this one Bhakta Bab, we'll call him. That wasn't his name. But this one Bhakta Bab was visiting our family in Port Macquarie, right? And he'd maybe been a devotee for 2-3 months, I think, at the most, right? And as he came, he came in and he was telling all of us very esoteric truths. He was telling us where the jiva has originated from. He was telling us Srila Prabhupada's Swarup in the spiritual world, right? He was telling us all of these things, right? And he was going around and he was saying all sorts of stuff. And of course, as I mentioned before, my mother's relatively senior in the Krishna consciousness movement, and he was chastising her for not properly setting up the altar, right? And I still remember I was telling him, I told him, you know, I don't have too much attraction to Krishna's pastimes. Sometimes I get bored. I was telling him these things. I'm hoping to have some more relish. And he looked at me and he nodded with a lot of wisdom and knowing. And he said, don't worry, Prabhu, it will come with time. So I still remember this devotee, right? He was a lot of fun, right? At the end, I think he pushed everyone's buttons a bit too much, and the devotee leader who he was with just chastised him for like half an hour in front of everyone. It was a little uncomfortable, but what to do? He received the mercy. But anyways, right? So this devotee, he's telling us all of these esoteric things. I was very surprised, right? Senior devotees who've been at ISKCON for, well, who were the first disciples of Srila Prabhupada aren't out there announcing Srila Prabhupada's form in the spiritual world. And here we have this very fortunate soul, right? Announcing this to all of us, even though he hasn't read the Nectar of Instruction, right? So why am I making this point? I don't want to say he was envious, right? But I do want to make the point that we can sometimes see people behaving in this way. They want to take knowledge in order to establish how great they are, right? And they think, if I propound this very esoteric knowledge, if I explain this to everyone, then everyone will think how great I am, right? Everyone will think, oh, wow, this person, he knows this person, he knows that. Therefore, he is some sort of great devotee. And what is this driven by? It's driven by envy. One sees, oh, this person, he's getting a lot of respect. He's getting a lot of prestige, right? He's getting a whole lot of these things by his knowledge, right? Therefore, I want some of that. And how can I get people to think I'm very respectable? I will do it by sharing all of these very, very high things. And now with Shripad Google Acharya, it's very easy to learn whatever knowledge we want to, right? Whatever we want, just Google away, you know, ISKCON controversy knowledge, boom, 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 you've Googled it, boom, now suddenly I'm very knowledgeable. I can tell you about all of these things. I haven't read Srimad Bhagavatam. I have read Srimad Bhagavatam, just not all of the purports, just the translations I've read, right? Very knowledgeable like this, right? So this is why envy is so important, right? Because envy will take root. When we are non-envious, then we can somehow enter into some of the more higher confidential knowledge and we can understand it deeper. Why? Because we are no longer trying to take this knowledge in a competitive way. And then we can treat it with the respect that it deserves, right? So we hear this. And so because Arjuna is never envious, he will impart this most confidential knowledge and realization, right? So we are hearing also that it must be imparted. It is not that he will realize this most confidential knowledge and realization. He is not saying because you are non-envious, naturally you will understand this. He is saying because you are non-envious, I will give you this knowledge, right? We are hearing with other things, control your senses and you will realize this, this, and that, right? Control your senses and you'll realize you are not this body, right? Meditate on the world and you'll realize all these things. But the most confidential knowledge is not realized within the heart. The most confidential knowledge is planted within the heart. Planted when one has the adhikar and the qualification, right? So therefore we hear all of the glories of the spiritual master, they apply once again, all the more here, right? So, 1 second, I'll just, yeah. So all the more they apply here. Rohan Prabhu, he's laughing. Okay, they apply all the more here, okay? So all the more they apply. Because here we are finding knowledge. Knowledge is always found faster, right? When one is under the guidance of the spiritual master. But this is knowledge that can only be passed down, right? Why is this the case? Can anyone think why this knowledge must be passed down?
How are you going to figure it out?
Sorry?
How are you going to figure it out?
Yes, there's that one aspect, and we'll cover upon this, and we'll touch upon this more in the Ishopanishad. How can we speculatively understand these higher things, right? But also, but also we find that it is the nature of this knowledge that it is gate kept, right? It is the nature of this knowledge that it is kept away from others, right? Again, one must be non-envious. We are hearing about the qualifications for this knowledge, and only the spiritual master can discern that, right? Does this make sense? So therefore, one must receive this knowledge. This is the second thing we are understanding. And finally, the most obvious one, who can tell me? I gave you that second one because it's there simply just in one word. What is the final thing? This isn't a qualification. This is just the nature of this knowledge. What is the, oh yeah, Mrugank Prabhu joined midway. What is the last aspect of this invocation? What is the last thing it is telling us? Yes, there we go. Alex Prabhu has nicely shared, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. Interesting point. Alex, you're saying, but not relieved of material existence per se. Well, by definition, if one is in material existence, one is experiencing its miseries, right? If one is in the material world and not having any miseries, that means they've spiritualized the material world, if that makes sense. They go hand in hand. But you are correct. It doesn't mean that one disappears from the material world. And thankfully so, because we want people who have understood this confidential knowledge to share it in this material world. If they're not sharing it, if they disappear instantly, they can't share it with us, right? But yeah, that's the point. Okay, now let's go into the next part of the invocation before I bore you all with this consistent word for word. Okay, very famous text. I'm sure maybe some of you have already memorized this. Maybe Mrugank Prabhu can say the English. Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam Pavitram Midam Uttamam Pratyaksha Sa Vagamam Dharmyam Susukham Kartum Avyayam.
This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of vision. It is everlasting and is joyfully performed.
Jai. We already know this is about pure bhakti because it says joyfully performed, right? And we cannot say this about virtually any other method of spiritual realization. So I guess at this point, I do want to say what this most confidential knowledge is. We've understood that there is confidential knowledge, which is knowledge of the soul and the body, right? And karma and all of these things, liberation. And then we know there is more confidential knowledge, which is the nature of attaining the supreme through bhakti. This most confidential knowledge is, again, what do we hear Krishna say? It is everlasting, right? This is ananya bhakti, satata bhakti, right? Bhakti which is eternal, right? Bhakti which is pure. In this chapter, why is this the most confidential knowledge? Because this is the heart of bhakti. This is pure bhakti. We've been hearing about other forms of bhakti, and we have been hearing about pure bhakti before. But we've only been hearing about pure bhakti contrasted against mixed bhakti. In this chapter, we will go to the heart of ananya bhakti, right? Of soul, pure bhakti, which has been described in the 8th chapter, right? So in the one sense, this 9th chapter is leading on from all the other chapters in terms of it building upon this most confidential knowledge. But why is this confidential knowledge being discussed now? It is being discussed because we've been hearing in the past chapter about ananya bhakti, about pure bhakti. And so we are hearing about this. In the purport, some of you might have read it and had a question about Srila Prabhupada. He starts talking about all the different levels of karmic reactions, of sinful reactions. I'm going to very much upset all of you and delay that. We're going to discuss that in Nectar of Devotion because Nectar of Devotion describes it in better depth. So in Nectar of Devotion, we will discuss more about the different levels of sinful reactions. Okay. So what do we hear about this knowledge? It is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest of knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is perfection of religion. It is everlasting, and it is joyfully performed. What does it mean to be the king of knowledge? What does it mean for Krishna to say something is the king of knowledge, right? Krishna, he is the source of all knowledge, right? Vedavid, Vedanta Krid, right? Or Vedanta Krid, Vedavid. I get it mixed up every single time, right? But he is the source of all knowledge. He is the writer, composer of Vedanta. All knowledge comes from him. And yet Krishna, he's saying this is the king of knowledge, right? We can take many meanings from this. In one sense, this is the knowledge of kings, right? The great kings, and we speak about kings in the traditional sense, not the rascal demonic rulers we have in the world today, but the traditional noble kings. They understood this. Why? Who can tell me what is the asana, what is the throne that was often given to kings? We hear this in Chaitanya Charitamrita. What sort of throne were kings given in Vedic times?
Lion, Simhasana?
Lion king, the Singhasana, right? What does this recommend? What does this represent, rather? What does it represent to have a lion to have a lion throne, right? What does this represent? It represents that one is ruling over one's animal activities, right? It is representing that one is conquering even over the animal kingdom. This is the position of the human. The human transcends his animal nature, right? Therefore, we find the kings are given the lion throne. One is not a king by his strength and his power, as much as those things are valid. One is a king by the nobility by which they have transcended this animal nature. Some of us might be familiar with the Upadeshamrita, right? The opening text, Vacho vegam manasa krodha vegam jihva vegam udaropasta vegam etan veganyo vishaheta dhiraha. How does it end?
Sarvam apimam prithivim chashishya.
So this is often, and it is the main translation, we can say, that this person is qualified to take disciples all around the world, right? All over the world, one is qualified to take disciples, right? And yet, another translation is that this person is fit to rule the world, right? One is fit to be king over the whole world, right? So this is the knowledge of kings, okay? This is the knowledge of kings, because kings, again, are not the hedonistic things that we think, right? In this context. In this context, to be a king actually meant something, okay? But not only that, it is also the king of all knowledge. All knowledge is conquered by this knowledge of pure bhakti, right? This is the greatest of all knowledge. It is the most secret of all secrets. Sometimes people will hear, right? We are not doing bhakti. I mean, we're not doing jnana yoga, so they think this is speculation and sentimentalism. Last night, there was this one person and he was coming to the temple. And so they asked me, I was having prasad, so they asked me to speak with him, right? And so I spoke shortly with him and I sat down and he told me, he said, I'm not so interested in bhakti. I'm here because I want to learn about janana, right? And I was thinking, oh, wow, well, what is this janana? So I was looking confused at him. And he was saying, he said, oh, do you get what I'm saying? And I said, no, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. Then he said, well, you see, in the Bhagavad-gītā, there are 5 different ways to attain Krishna. Then he started saying, and then he said, there is dhyana, there is bhakti, and there is janana. And I realized, oh, you mean jnana. And he said, no, I don't mean dhyana. I mean janana. And so we had this whole back and forth about janana in the Bhagavad-gītā. Until at one point I had to spell it out. I said, no, jnana is what I'm talking about. Jnana. And he said, yeah, janana. So you'll see. And he sort of came along and he had this idea. He said, I don't want to do bhakti. I'm not here for blind faith. I'm not here for no philosophy. I want to understand philosophy, right? So therefore I want to do jnana yoga. That's what he was telling me, right? And so sometimes people will have this understanding, right? That there is no knowledge in bhakti. But what are we going to hear? In the elaboration of this whole chapter, we are going to hear quite high knowledge, right? And what does Krishna himself say? This is the king of knowledge. This is the most secret of all secrets, right? So bhakti is not devoid of knowledge. Tripurari Maharaj, he has a similar story where he was on book distribution and somebody said the same thing. It's always funny because people who tend to say things like that are only vaguely familiar with Vedic literature, right? So you'll hear always funny mispronunciations again, like Janana. And so he had the same one. So he was saying one person came up to him and he said, I'm a Janana yogi, right? And Tripurari Maharaj, he began to start preaching Bhagavad-gītā to him. And this person, he said, for a bhakta, you sure do have a lot of Janana. And then he sort of went on along on his way, right? So again, people have this idea bhakti is devoid of knowledge. No. I mean, I'm sure you've all experienced by this point in Bhakti-śāstrī, right? That there is a lot of knowledge, right? That is incorporated. Just because we are not doing jnana yoga does not mean we are not engaged in jnana. And in fact, it is the irony that the greatest and highest jnana is not found in jnana yoga, but is found in bhakti yoga, right? So it's not even that, we have as much as the jnanis. Not even that. We have more than the jnanis in terms of knowledge and realization, right? So again, you can speak forever about this invocation, but I do want to get the invocation done before we reach our halfway point. And with this third point, let me see, long nectarian purports. Maybe we can have Tarun Prabhu can read out the Sanskrit, the English. Ashradadhana purusha dharmasyasa parantapa aprapya mam nivartante mrityu sangsara vartmani.
Those who are not faithful in their devotional service cannot attain me, O conqueror of enemies. Therefore, they return to the path of birth and death in this material world.
Yeah. So we find here those who are not faithful in this devotional service cannot attain me, O conqueror of enemies. Therefore, they return to the path of birth and death in this material world, right? So, because one might wonder, how can we understand this, right? How could some person hear this glory of bhakti, right? And want to remain in samsara, right? How could this be the case? Because again, what is it? It is dutifully performed. Have we not read that in text too? If we are hearing that this is the most secret knowledge and it is joyful to perform, then how can anyone be away from it, right? So this is the nature, again, of the foolishness of the conditioned soul, right? Because those who are not faithful in this devotional service cannot attain, right? Now, what is interesting, when we hear of faith, when somebody says, do you have faith? What do we normally think?
Do you hold a certain sense of belief in a particular ideology?
Yeah, that you believe in something, right? And when somebody says, do you have faith in Krishna consciousness? Do you have faith in the Vedic literature? What do we normally think of? Well, we normally think of the existence of God, don't we? We think, you have faith that God exists. You have faith in this belief, right? But this is not exactly what we are getting at here in the Vedic, in the Bhagavad-gītā, right? This is not what we are getting at here in the Bhagavad-gītā. What we are getting at here is we are having faith in this devotional service. Do we understand a distinction here, right? It is not just, I believe in Krishna, therefore I have strong faith, right? It is not just, I believe that I am spirit soul, therefore I have strong faith, right? It is not that I have this list of propositions, right? I have this list of facts about the world that I believe are true, and therefore I have faith. Faith here is given as accepting that this bhakti yoga process will guide us to the destination that we desire, that bhakti yoga does have all of these glories, that by chanting Hare Krishna, we are able to attain all of these high things. This is what faith is, right? And if one lacks the faith in bhakti, right? Why? Because they have all these other things that they would rather have faith in. There are karma yoga, jnana yoga, all sorts of other things. If one lacks this faith, then they will not attain the Supreme Lord. They will keep on going in the cycle of samsara, right? So faith in bhakti, faith in this process, this is the heart of faith. Again, Vedic knowledge is not abstract. It is not something that's held up in the air, right? These theoretical understandings, it's a practical thing. And faith too is practical. It is a faith in the pragmatic process of Krishna consciousness. Anyways, I wanted to keep some momentum. We've done 3 texts in nearly an hour, so we'll try and pick up the speed.
Just a question.
Yeah, for sure.
What if someone had faith in the process but not faith in God? Can they still follow that?
Yeah, I'd be curious to find somebody who has faith in bhakti without having faith in the existence of God. So I'm sure that would come along as a byproduct, right? But I don't know, if you have faith in bhakti, quite naturally you would have faith in some sense of Krishna, right? Maybe that faith is not necessarily one of absolute existence, but the whole point of bhakti is that you're rendering service unto Krishna, right? I don't see how you could serve somebody who you don't think exists, right? So yeah, that's what I would say. I think all of those things come as a byproduct of it, right? But what I would say is it's not the focal point, right? Yeah. No. I totally get you. I was thinking. I was thinking the same thing. That's how I made this point in the first place, right? It's interesting that that contrast is made, but the emphasis is placed on the process of bhakti, right? This is where our faith is residing in, something practical. There's no such thing as a free lunch. We can't just think, oh well, I think Krishna is God, and therefore all is well, right? There's a famous saying in the Bible, right? Faith without works is dead, right? And in that context, it's talking about faith as in just believing in God, right? Even the demons believe in God, right? Is a very famous Christian saying, right? So text 4 now begins the actual most confidential knowledge. We've heard the glorification of it, right? We've heard all of these things. Now we are beginning to understand that most confidential knowledge. And what is it, right? Well, again, it is building on what we've already discussed before, the nature of the Lord and his energies. Maybe we can have Shavina Mataji can say the English. Maya tatam midam sarvam jagadavyakta murtina matsthani sarvabhutani nachaham teshvavasthitaha.
By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I'm not in them. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Jai. So we are here very nicely hearing. Krishna is beginning to start confusing everyone, right? And he's doing this on purpose. We are finding, I would say, even though Achintya Bheda, it's very much found in like text in chapter 7 or so. Here, Krishna is going to emphasize very strongly the Achintya part. So if you weren't confused before, you'll be confused now, okay? And Krishna, he's doing this on purpose. He's trying to draw out the contrasts, right? By which we can understand the way he relates to the world, right? And he's doing this, again, to establish the nature of this bhakti. Again, when we go through a second time, we'll go a little deeper into it, okay? So, what is this dynamic that Krishna has described? By me, in my unmanifested form, this universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them, right? So, firstly, we'll hear that Krishna is saying his unmanifested form, his avyakta murtina, right? Who has read the purport? Who can tell me? How does Srila Prabhupada understand this? It's right here at the beginning. How do we understand this in the purport? What has Srila Prabhupada given us?
Well, is he saying like he's unmanifested because he's not visible to our eyes?
Yes. So Krishna is all pervading, and this is one of those really confusing things. Krishna's form is infinite, right? and yet it is also, it is present everywhere, and yet it is also a form, right? It is somehow limited and infinite. This is one of those very inconceivable things. But Krishna, one can perceive Krishna everywhere and anywhere. Srila Prabhupada would say this, that he is directly seeing Krishna, right? Why are we not seeing Krishna, right? When we go into the temple room, what do we see? We see marble, most of us, right? Most of us, at least, right? See only marble. I know I definitely do, because my senses are not yet spiritualized. And so people say this is a cop-out, right? I want to see God. If God's real, let me see him. And yet, we've now got a new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. If Sri Mataji wanted to have, she wanted to give him a bit of advice on how he can run the country a bit better, right? Which I'm sure she could. Would she be able to just go along and, knock on the door at Parliament House and say, I'm going to have lunch with Anthony Albanese and I'm going to tell him, close down the slaughterhouses, etc., etc. Would that happen, right? No, it wouldn't, right? And yet I can tell you there is much less Aishvarya in Anthony Albanese than there is in Sri Bhagavan Krishna, right? So if we can believe it so easily, then one can't so easily have a direct vision, right? Of good old, good honorable Prime Minister, right? Then how much harder would it be to see Krishna, to see the Supreme Personality? And yet we feel so qualified to say, I want to see God now, right? Some adhikar must be there, right? And what is that adhikar? It is to have the spiritualized senses, right? By spiritualizing one's senses, then we are able to see him. And which sense is the easiest one by which we can perceive the Supreme Lord? Well, it's actually by hearing, right? So by hearing and chanting this Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. By chanting like this, very easily we'll be able to perceive the Supreme Lord. We'll be able to perceive him as present everywhere, right? But anyways, Krishna, he is drawing out this contrast. He's drawing out this tension, and he is also mentioning the unmanifested form, okay? So this is very essential as we continue along, because it is triggering along a feeling of reverence, right? Naturally, by hearing about the elevated position of Krishna, one is drawn, right? One is drawn naturally to worship. Of course, we speak about love and intimacy in Krishna conscious circles, but love in reverence is also very much bhakti, right? Bhakti in intimacy is very, very esoteric, but it is not that it is impure bhakti if it is done with reverence. And it is a natural response to hearing the majesty of Krishna that we respond with reverence. And so this will begin to get drawn out further. Let's have maybe Visakha. Oh, wait, have I already asked Visakha Mataji? I can't remember now. I don't think so. For text 5. Nacha matstani bhutani pashyame yogam aishvaryam bhuta brinnacha bhutasto mamatma bhuta bhavanaha.
And yet everything that is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulence. Although I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I am everywhere, I am not part of this cosmic manifestation. For myself is the very source of creation.
Jai. So here we find Krishna, he's continuing this, right? And it's very confusing. It seems very contradictory, right? And yet everything that is created does not rest in me, right? Very confusing. But what does Krishna say? Behold my mystic opulence, right? Krishna, he is drawing out again, what is his nature? What is his opulence? What is his aishvarya? What is it that makes us all realize that this is a person that I must reciprocate to with devotion, with reverence, right? Although I'm the maintainer of all living entities, and although I'm everywhere, I'm not part of this cosmic manifestation, right? What did he say before, right? All beings are in me. Doesn't he say that? Right here. All beings are in me. And yet what is he saying here? Everything that is created does not rest in me. Make up your mind, Krishna, right? Krishna, he's contradicting himself immediately, one after the other, right? But with this contradiction, he says, behold my mystic opulence. Krishna, he's drawing out, all contradictions are valid within me. Shivaram Swami, he says, people often like to say, can God create a rock that's so heavy he can't lift it, right? And Shivaram Swami says, yes, he can, and then he can lift it. What to say, right? We try to do these cute little logical propositions, but instead, our natural response to the Supreme Personality of Godhead should be, behold his mystic opulence. This is our response, right? So we must take this in mind. There is an inconceivability to the Supreme Lord. Okay, so now to understand this tension, right? Which is, of course, achintya bheda, which we've already discussed. Krishna, he gives a wonderful analogy in text 6, okay? Let's have Alex can read out the translation. Yathakasha sthito nityam vayu sarvatra go mahan tatha sarvani bhutani matsthanityopadharaye. Yeah.
Understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere rests always in the sky, all created beings rest in me.
Yes. So here we find Krishna, he's in one sense elaborating upon it, right? We understand this idea, right? The sky meaning, of course, like in this sense, the akash, right? The ether, right? And wind blows in the ether, right? And so it's resting in the sky, but it's also not the sky, right? It's not the ether. The wind that's blowing is not the sky, okay? Does this make sense? So in this way, we can begin to understand something about the way which the Supreme Lord relates. However, our acharyas do say that this analogy is in fact not perfect. It's a faulty one, and it's not faulty because Krishna is faulty. If anyone could come up with a perfect analogy, it would be Krishna, right? But the reason why this isn't perfect is no one can truly fully grasp it. Again, this is the inconceivable nature of the Lord, right? If we were to fully explain it, this would be a contradiction because we would be having somebody fully understanding the inconceivable nature of the Lord, and therefore there'd be no point in describing it as inconceivable if this analogy was perfect. Instead, it's only a beginning step to help us deeper and deeper realize these things, okay? This analogy kind of works, but we also have the issue that the wind and the sky have nothing to do with each other, right? They are separate, right? They don't have any attraction or attachment to each other. And therefore this analogy is not very perfect. Instead, it's only a beginning way, right? So we should understand this. Don't try to push this analogy too far because you'll run into a wall. Okay, I think this is a very natural place to stop because the next few texts will discuss something a little further. We'll have our 5-minute break and I'll see you all at 11:05. Okay, I think we can continue. I just realized I didn't pause the recording, so whoever's catching up on the recording is going to experience our 5-minute break as well.
It's a spiritual practice, an opportunity for meditation and patience and stuff.
I can smash out one round. Okay, I'll give everyone a minute or a few seconds to return. Is based on the Upanishads, thus it preserves the impartiality of the absolute. It's impartial. Okay, I think we'll just continue then. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So, as we had just discussed, so far, what we've discussed is we've discussed the relationship that Krishna has with the world, okay? And this is, again, as I said, it sort of triggers up feelings of aishvarya, of reverence, of devotion, which are all parts of pure bhakti. Again, sometimes devotees can get confused because there's so many different levels. You know, we talk about nishkama karma yoga, and then we talk about mishra bhakti, and then we talk about bhakti and reverence, and then bhakti and intimacy and all. Pure bhakti can involve devotion which is held intimately or with awe and reverence. Both of those can be pure bhakti, okay? Reverence does not make bhakti impure. It makes it less intimate, and it's not the type of bhakti that presides over Goloka, which is a very intimate bhakti, but it's not that bhakti with awe and reverence is impure. It's still very pure. You can be anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadya navritam and approach the Supreme Lord with great awe and reverence. Prahlad Maharaj is a great example. Prahlad Maharaj was not experiencing love and intimacy. He was experiencing love in awe and reverence, to my knowledge. That's my understanding, at least. Okay, so let's keep on going. And again, another famous text, maybe Mrunal Mataji can read out the English. +11.
To Alex's comment.
Oh, okay. Sarva bhutani kaunteya prakritim yanti mamikam kalpakshaye punastani kalpadav visrijamyaham.
O son of Kunti, at the end of the millennium, all material manifestations enter into my nature. And at the beginning of another millennium, by my potency, I create them again. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So at this point, Krishna, he's discussed how all the worlds relate to him, right? He's discussed that, and now he's discussing how he engages in, or rather the nature of these worlds, how they relate to him, right? What does Krishna say here? O son of Kunti, at the end of the millennium, right? And by my potency, I create them. And then also they enter into my nature, which is their destruction, right? Maybe some of us are familiar if you see like some introductory handbook, or even many cultural Hindus, you'll ask them, what's the Hindu Trinity? What will they say? What's the Hindu Trinity? Who can tell me?
Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh.
Sorry?
Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh.
Yes, right? So they'll say this, and they'll say, these are the Trinity. And what are they? What are their jobs? Yeah.
So Brahma is creation, Vishnu is a maintainer, and Shiva is the destroyer.
Yes, right? This is what we hear, right? We hear this often. But do we hear this in the Bhagavad-gītā? Well, maybe in some Bhagavad-gītās, but not in the Bhagavad-gītā as it is, okay? Because what are we hearing here? Krishna, he's already described he's the sustainer, right? All things rest in him. Now we're hearing he's the destroyer because all material manifestations enter into his nature. And we hear he's the creator because at the beginning of another millennium, he creates them again, right? So like this, we hear the nature of Krishna is all of these things. Krishna is absolute, right? All of these roles are found in him, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? Of course, Shiva helps in destruction, but he helps in destruction, right? Brahma, he creates after the Supreme Lord manifests, right? But ultimately, these are coming from Krishna. And therefore, the Hindu Trinity is not a concept that, at least as it's commonly understood, that we uphold. Srila Prabhupada explains how to properly understand this idea in Ishopanishad, but we'll get to that when we do Ishopanishad. Okay. Then we come to text 8, which elaborates on this further. Maybe we can have Vidhi Mataji actually can say the English. Prakritim swam avashtabhya visrijami punah punah bhuta grama mimam kritsnam avasham prakriter vashat.
The whole cosmic order is under me. Under my will, it is automatically manifested again and again. And under my will, it is annihilated at the end.
Jai, right. So this might be triggering our memories from last chapter, hopefully. Actually, you might find a lot of stuff that's related to chapter 8, but the majority of stuff is chapter 7. It's often commented upon. In the same way that chapter 3 and chapter 5, a little bit of a throwback, hopefully those are still fresh enough out of memories. Chapter 5 seems to build on chapter 3 a lot, right? It seems to go a little further, but build on it. In the same way, chapter 9, in a lot of ways, seems to build on chapter 7. This is a little bit almost a throwback more to chapter 8. But just as a general rule, you will see echoes of the previous chapters in this one. So what do we find here? Krishna says some rather interesting things. Okay, the whole cosmic order is under me. Under my will, it is automatically manifested again and again. And under my will, it is annihilated at the end. So we're actually continuing the nature of the relationship of Krishna and the material world. The previous section, right, the previous texts we were discussing describes them in a passive way. How do the worlds exist in relationship to Krishna, right? And it's a chintya bheda bheda tattva. Now we are hearing, how does Krishna actively relate to the worlds? Yes, Alex, you're correct. So we're hearing about the nature of Krishna's relation to the material world, okay? And how does everything happen? It happens under Krishna's will, okay? All of it happens under Krishna's will, right? All of this does. However, we must think of, can we say that everything happens purely just because Krishna wants it to? In one sense, yes. In one sense, there is a sense of, well, if Krishna wants it, it happens. And that is true. But on the other hand, Krishna, he has everything that he could ever want, right? Krishna doesn't need anything. Krishna is fully renounced. He's full of all wealth. He's full of all happiness. So why would he want anything if he has everything? Do we understand that train of logic? Why would he do anything if he already has everything? So we can think that actually this is the role of the Shakti. This is the role of the energy of Krishna, okay? Krishna's energies are so arranged, they spur him to move, right? Because Krishna wants to seek after Srimati Radharani, therefore Krishna moves, right? Because Krishna wishes to wrestle with all his cowherd boyfriends, therefore Krishna moves, right? Because Krishna wishes to dance with the gopis, therefore he runs around and moves. Movement in the Supreme Personality of Godhead happens because his devotees spur him to wish to do something. The devotees agitate Krishna so as to make him act. And therefore, all of these things are happening. Why? So that Krishna can act out his pastimes. So yes, in one sense, it's happening because of the will of Krishna, the pure will. But this, he is willing it, not out of a pure act of power, but an act of joy. Again, this is Leela, this is play. Krishna, he is manifesting all these things so that he can play. This is all an outpouring of his playing. This is the playfulness of Krishna. all infinite material worlds, all infinite spiritual worlds have manifested so that Krishna can play. So that sometimes he can play as Nrsingadev and kill demons. So that sometimes he can play the very noble Ramchandra, right? And at the highest form, so that he can play and be bound up by his devotees. All of this all of this is being manifested again and again so Krishna can play. Krishna is manifesting these material worlds so that all of these rebellious spirit souls who wish to enjoy a part of him, so that they can exist here, but also so that he can manifest his pastimes here. There are some pastimes that Krishna can only manifest in this material world. He can't kill demons in the spiritual world because there's no demons to kill, right? So Krishna wishes to come to this world, right? He can't experience all sorts of different things without manifesting in this material world. So this material world exists so that Krishna can manifest his pastimes in it. Why does this world exist? This world exists because Krishna wishes to dance in it. And this is the very esoteric, complex philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So yes, it is under Krishna's will, but that is not a will as an act of power. It is an act of joy. But now we might wonder, well, if it's under your will, well, you know, there was a movie made a few years ago with some comedian. He's not so famous anymore, but he was famous when I was a bit younger. Which is not a very large period of time, but Bill O'Connolly, I think his name was, he was like Irish or Scottish or something. And he made some movie about a man who was suing God because he was thinking there's too much nonsense going on in the world. My life is too difficult. I'm going to sue God for creating the world, right? And it's based, I think, on a play called The Man Who Sues God. So if all of this is happening under the will of Krishna, then surely we can hold him responsible. Maybe we can have I already asked Shivam? I don't think I've already asked Shivam.
No.
Shivam can say the English then. Nachamam tani karmani nibadhnanti dhananjaya udasina vadasinam asaktam teshu karmasu.
O Dhananjaya, all this work cannot bind me. I am ever detached from all these material activities, seated as though neutral.
Jai. Okay, I won't discuss this too much because we already discussed this at length in the 4th chapter and other chapters. Okay, so we won't go too much into extra detail, but Krishna, he's again making the point, right? All of these things I'm causing to happen, but I'm neutral to all of them, right? I'm detached to all of it. This world happens, and yet I am detached to it, right? I'm not engaged in the karmic implications, and therefore make as many lawsuits as you will, you cannot find me guilty, right? And how this is so, again, we already discussed this with Yayatamam Prapadyante and all of these texts, okay? How is he neutral? Maya dhyakshena prakritihi suyate sa characharam hetunanena kaunteya jagad viparivartate. Maybe Tanya Mataji can help us out with the English. Unless she is AWOL, in which case we
Sorry, I'm outside, but I'm going to read it.
Yeah,
this material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under this rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again.
Jai. So here we are hearing again, right? Like this distinction between Krishna and the material energy, okay? So this, this material energy, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, right? So Krishna, he is again directing this energy. However, it is not that he is directly carrying it out. We can think of the famous analogy, right, of the king and his ministers, right? The king can give the instruction, but he is not the one carrying the activity out, right? In the same way, all of the energies of Krishna are directed by Krishna and they carry the work out, right? We find in the purport, Purijan Prabhu, I know, and Surrender Unto Me, he really finds this wonderful section of the purport. I'm just trying to find it up here so I can show you all without just reading it out. Here we go. Because he glances over material nature, there is undoubtedly activity on the part of the Supreme Lord, but he has nothing to do with the manifestation of the material world directly, okay? This example is given in the Smriti. When there is a fragrant flower before someone, the fragrance is touched by the smelling power of the person. Yet the smelling and the flower are detached from one another. There is a similar connection between the material world and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Actually, he has nothing to do with this material world, but he creates by his glance and ordains. In summary, material nature, without the superintendence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, cannot do anything. Yet the Supreme Lord is detached from all material activities. In one sense, this is strongly reminiscent of our triangle. Remember, we had our triangle of doers, right? This is coming back to the triangle of doers, right? We have the Supreme Lord, we have the individual spirit soul, and we have the material nature, okay? So we find like this, Krishna, how is he neutral? He's neutral because he's never directly carrying it out, right? And now Krishna, he switches to those who are misunderstanding the way he relates to this material world. And this is one of my favorite texts because it is a classic Mayavadi bashing text. And because I know Alex Prabhu loves Mayavadi bashing, I think maybe more than, he loves it more than even I do. He can read out the English. Avajananti ma mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram.
Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be.
So what do we find here? Fools deride me when I descend in the human form, right? Because people, what happens? How many times they'll see Krishna and they'll say, oh, he's just a man, right? You'll see him, because especially Krishna is very sweet. When they see Vishnu, how many arms does Vishnu have, right? Many arms, right? Many armed form, right? They see Shiva with, even they'll see Shiva and they'll see him, right, with a third eye, and they'll think, oh, something special is going on here. But what is Krishna's form? What is the aspect of Krishna's form that makes him unhuman-like? There's nothing, right? It's a very human-like form. This is what makes it so sweet, so beautiful, right? But so some people, they will become bewildered by this, right? And they will think, oh, Krishna, he looks like a human being. He's playing the flute. How can this be the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Right? How can this be the Supreme Personality of Godhead? He looks so human-like, right? But this is the beauty of Krishna, right? Krishna looks human-like in the most beautiful way possible, but this is the feature by which we know he is not a regular human, because no regular human can be as beautiful as Sri Bhagavan Krishna, right? And in fact, it's actually getting it the wrong way around. It's not that Krishna is human-like, it's that humans are Krishna-like, if that makes sense, right? It is not that we have created a God in our own image, but rather a God has created us in his image. Srila Prabhupada will often quote the Bible in this sense, right? And yes, as Alex said, because he dances, because he plays the flute. And in fact, when we get to Nectar of Devotion, this is what is said. We hear of all the other avatars. We hear of Shiva, we hear of Narayan, we hear of all of these forms. And why is Krishna held as a most supreme form? Because he has a beautiful flute, because he has beautiful pastimes, because he has beautiful associates to share those pastimes with, and because he has his beautiful form, right? It is the beauty of this form that lets us know. However, many people, they will be bewildered. They will not understand this. You'll hear this all the time. If you meet more conservative fundamentalist members of other religions, they'll say this. Christians, they'll say, evangelical, conservative, fundamentalist Christians, mind you. There's many very sweet, nice Christians who will accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? But you'll meet the more fanatic ones and they'll say, oh, Krishna, he got shot in the foot and he died. Therefore, he's just a regular person, right? Just a regular person. They'll say, I'm sure he's buried somewhere, right? They'll say like this, all sorts of blasphemous nonsense, right? They'll say these things, right? Krishna, he's got 2 arms and 2 legs. How can we say that this is the Supreme Personality, right? People, they will say like this, you'll meet. But this is why. This isn't because they're very intelligent. It's because they're very foolish. right? Because they do not understand the nature of the Supreme Lord, that he is infinite beauty, right? And that infinite beauty is held so wonderfully in this human-like form. So they will think of Krishna either to be, they'll think of him either as a very powerful man and people started developing some mythology around him, or they will think that, that this form of Krishna is temporary, right? Just foolishness. So who are the sort of people who are foolish in this way? Let's hear about them in the next text. And maybe we can have Katyayani Mataji. Would you like to say the English? Moghasha mogha karmano mogha jnana vichetasaha rakshasim asurim chaiva prakritim mohinim shritaha.
Translation. Those who are thus bewildered are attracted by demoniac and atheistic views. In that deluded condition, their hopes of liberation, their fruitive activities, and their culture of knowledge are all defeated. Thank you, Prabhu.
Jai. So here we come to the point that I was making before, Alex, when you were asking about bhakti being the easier way, right? Especially if one does not understand the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all of these things are thrown away, right? If a person, sometimes people will say, I hear people, devotees will say, and they'll say, you know, I understand why, they don't want to be critical. But they'll see somebody doing all sorts of civil activism, or they're doing some sort of Ashtanga yoga, or they're doing some sort of thing, and they'll say some nonsense, Krishna was just a man, or like this, right? And then they'll say, oh, at least he's doing what he's doing, right? At least he's vegetarian, at least he's something. Well, Krishna does not take that view. Krishna's view is, well, no, actually, all of these things are defeated, right? Their hopes for liberation, their hopes for fruitive activities, all the good they can do, all of this is defeated. All of this is discarded, right? So you'll find that all of these speculative things, people will say, oh, that's fine. We'll see many bogus leaders, right? I won't name names, but I'm sure when we say bogus sadhus, we can have many faces come to mind, right? And people will say, at least they're doing this, at least they're doing that. And on one hand, that's true, right? We can appreciate that in order to not get ourselves in a critical mindset. We can also appreciate it in terms of the positive effect they're having. However, for their own sakes, they have no real hope, right? They have no real hope, because by saying this speculative thing, they've shot their own case down, right? There is no hope. Why? Because again, we hear in the Chatur Shloki of Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna is the absolute truth. What is not Krishna is not true, right? What is not connected to Krishna is not true. It is non-existent. And if so, one connects their spiritual life to not Krishna, then their spiritual life is non-existent. Having now described these foolish individuals, we now hear about the great individuals. And this will segue us into our activity. We'll read text 13 to 14, and then we will have our activity. Okay, maybe we can have, I don't even know who I haven't asked now. I'm going to start repeating, I think. Mrugank Prabhu, would you be able to say the English? Yeah. Mahatma nastu mam partha daivim prakritim ashritaha bhajantanyanya manaso gyatva bhutadim avyayam.
O son of Ptah, those who are not deluded, the great souls, are under the protection of the divine nature. They are fully engaged in devotional service because they know me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible.
Jai. And Adim is very important, right? Is very important to note, right? Because who is the Adim, right? What do we sing every morning? Govindam Adi Purusham Tama Aham Bhajami, right? Govinda, he is this original personality. Govindam Adi Purusham, right? And what do we hear about him? In the Brahma Samhita, we hear these wonderful descriptions of this two-armed form of the Lord with his sweet fruit, right? Venum konvantam aravinda dalaya taksham, right? So we hear here this original personality, and Srila Prabhupada, he actually says this in the purport, right? Such Mahatmas or great souls, right? These pure devotees are not even attracted by Krishna's other features, such as the four-armed form of Mahavishnu. They are simply attracted by the two-armed form of Krishna, right? So here we find it. That this, what does it mean to be a Mahatma? It means to be attracted to this original beautiful personality. What to speak of these personalities not being attracted to the four-armed form of Mahavishnu? The four-armed form of Mahavishnu is attracted to the two-armed form of Krishna, right? We know Mahavishnu, he steals the children of that Brahmana because he knows that Krishna will be able to come and save them, and therefore he will have darshan of Arjuna and Krishna, right? So what then to speak of the Mahatmas, so beautifully absorbed in Krishna consciousness? And this is what a Mahatma is. We throw this word Mahatma around cheaply. It's not very cheap at all, right? What is a Mahatma? Someone who is fully engaged in devotional service to Sri Bhagavan Krishna. Now, text 14, text 13 described these personalities, those who are not the ones who are bewildered, those who are not them. Now we are hearing about their activities. This should be one of your memory shlokas, right? Just for the sake of time. Actually, has anyone memorized it? I will do it.
I have done it.
Okay, Mrugank Prabhu, shoot away.
Imagine I get it wrong. Savitam kirtayanto mam yatantascha dridavritah namasyantyascha mam bhaktya nityayukta upasate.
Jai. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me. These great souls perpetually worship me with devotion, right? This is the nature of those great, great devotees, right? What are they doing? They're constantly engaging. They're constantly bowing down before the Lord, right? They're constantly worshiping with devotion, right? This is the nature of those high, high devotees, of those Mahatmas, of those very elevated personalities, right? Okay, so today we're going to do our activity. I'll give you guys 10 minutes. It's a very short activity. But it's one of the learning outcomes in the syllabus. Believe it or not, I am following the syllabus to some degree. And so one of the learning outcomes is we want to take these texts, and I'm going to split you into two groups because we've had a relatively small turnout today. And in these groups, I want you to come up with, go through these texts, text 13 to 14, and come up with as many as you can, at least 5. You'll be able to come up with many more examples of how Srila Prabhupada embodies this definition of a Mahatma, right? So, because we can very safely say Srila Prabhupada is a great Mahatma, right? And so let us prove that. So I'll split us up into the groups and we can all come up with ways in which Srila Prabhupada, and then we can read out those lists as we come back. I'll create the breakout rooms. I'll just pause the recording. Okay, group 1, which would be, I think group 1 was Katyayani Mataji's group, was group 1, I think, and Mrugank Prabhu's group was group 2. So we'll go with group 1 first.
Vidhi Mataji will lead that.
Jai.
I'll try to lead. It's not that I'm leading, but okay, I'll summarize the points that we found. We found quite a few. And after I summarize the points, I'll just try to relate it with the nature which Prabhupada exhibited, all these points. So the signs of a Mahatma is that he's already situated in the divine nature. He is not under the control of material nature. He does not divert his attention to anything outside of Krishna. He's always engaged in unswerving service of the Lord in Krishna consciousness. He's always engaged in chanting. He's always engaged in glorification of the Lord. He has firm determination to achieve the ultimate end, which is the association of the Supreme Lord. He strictly observes all rules and regulations, and he's always endeavoring for the principles. Prabhupada exhibited all of these right up to the T. He gave us the 4 regulative principles, which ensured that, we are not, engaged or in control of material nature. He's guiding us through his books. He definitely had divine nature because at such a late age, he agreed not agreed, he followed his guru's directions and traveled so far to the US, even at such a high age and suffering medically as well. But he was able to bring about Krishna consciousness in such a short period of time across the world. He was constantly preaching. He hardly used to sleep for just 2 or 3 hours, but he was always writing and preaching and recording. He used every material object that was given to him for Krishna consciousness. So there was a point that was raised in a crook that there was a reporter who said, why do you use Rolls Royce? And he commented, what Rolls Royce? For Krishna, it should be a gold chariot and not just something made out of metal and steel. So even if he was using material objects, it was always for Krishna, always for Krishna's service, always for Krishna's Krishna consciousness, spreading that thing. So those are the things. He followed all regulative principles. He gave us how to follow Ekadashi and all that. So that's the summary.
Jai, I remember, I think there was one, I think it was an interview in Australia, in fact, where one interviewer said, how much money does your movement have? And Srila Prabhupada said, all of the money belongs to us. We're just waiting for you to give it to us. Yeah, but yeah, Jai. Okay, very nice. Thank you. Let's hear from group 2.
Visakha is going to present. She's got the presentation.
I've got the screens, but it was mostly, Mrugank Prabhu and Mataji that mentioned examples, and a couple of other people as well. All right, am I going to speak? Okay. So someone with great determination. So he's an example that Srila Prabhupada went to the West to spread the word of KC. He strictly observed all rules and regulations. So he didn't compromise the 4 regulations, especially when he went to the West and when things were really difficult for him and his health wasn't actually the best. Took shelter of the divine energy. So throughout his time when he was spreading the word of KC, he was dependent on Krishna and he wasn't dependent on his personal desires. He was always focused on Krishna and the instruction of his guru, especially when he was spreading the word, without deviation of the mind. So an example that the group brought was that he used to translate books in the night with very little sleep. So he had 2 to 3 hours of sleep, but he would continuously be translating Srimad Bhagavatam. He knew Krishna to be original and inexhaustible. So he understood the conception of Krishna through his pop-ups and lectures and Vaishmayavad understanding. I forgot who actually said this, but I just typed that in the notes. They are attracted to the 2-armed form of Krishna. I couldn't think of an example of this, but this is listed in, I think, text 14.
One example you could say is that Srila Prabhupada installed deities of the 2-armed form of Krishna all around the world.
Yeah, that's a good example. And they always chanted the glories of Krishna in devotion. So I think Sharon Prabhu, he mentioned chanting, hearing, listening, so Shravanam, Saranam, etc. And so an example of this was establishing to chant the 16 rounds as basically a rule for all of us to follow.
Jai, nectar. So as we can see here, Srila Prabhupada is definitely a Mahatma. This is the 3rd, either the 2nd or the 3rd. No, it's the 3rd. This is the 3rd time we'll hear the word Mahatma used in the Bhagavad-gītā, and it's also the last. So we've now heard all that there is to be said about the Mahatma, and each time it's been used in the context of pure bhakti, right? Vasudevam sarvam miti sa Mahatma sudurlabha, right? That's the person who understands all things to be coming from Vasudeva, etc., right? So again, bhakti is so essential to the Bhagavad-gītā. Again, Mahatma, quite literally, the great soul, has been defined in terms of bhakti in all of its instances of mention. I want to look a tiny bit longer at these texts, and then actually we might wrap up early, depending how long these last few points I wanted to mention will be. Just one thing that I wanted to draw upon is we have with this, the most important thing comes first, which is kirtayanto mam, right? We're starting with the most important one, right? Satatam, always kirtayanto mam, always engaged in chanting, right? This chanting about the Supreme Lord, this is the essence of the Mahatma, right? And what is kirtan? Sometimes we'll hear this and we'll think kirtan means 24-hour kirtan, right? And that is kirtan. I'm not trying to say that's not kirtan. I'm not gonna just throw a spanner in your works like that. But kirtan is also a much broader thing, right? Kirtan is doing book distribution. Book distribution is to be considered one form of kirtan, right? Interestingly enough, and this is a total side note, but Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada said that those devotees who are involved in the printing of books, they are engaged in deity worship. That to print Vedic literature is actually an anga of deity worship. I just thought that was interesting. So the book distribution is kirtan, but the printing of the books is archana. But yeah, so they're always engaged in kirtan. What is kirtan? Book distribution is kirtan. Hearing Krishna, speaking Krishna katha is kirtan, right? All of the glorification of Krishna is kirtan, right? So kirtan is the heart of what the Mahatma does, right? Because the Mahatma is constantly engaged in glorifying Krishna, right? And we can see that as very much, not only is that the essence of the Mahatma here in the definition, it's also the essence of Srila Prabhupada, right? Every moment Srila Prabhupada is engaging in ways by which we can glorify Krishna, new and different ways, right? Again, I mentioned that point about Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur saying that the printing of the books is like deity worship. Why? Because we're finding all these new different ways of engaging all of the world in the glorification of Krishna. Srila Prabhupada, who can tell us the first Ratha Yatra, right? Where they have the beautiful chariot. What was it done in? Who can tell me? Who knows? The first Ratha Yatra done, obviously in the West.
Where was it done? San Francisco?
Yeah, but how did they do it? What was the Rath? What was the glorious Rath?
Didn't they build it?
It was a car. They did an early Ratha Yatra with a car, and they put like Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra in the car, right? And so we see a car. Srila Prabhupada sees a Rath, right? To do Ratha Yatra, a chariot for the chariot festival, right? This is what Srila Prabhupada sees, right? Constantly, this is kirtan, satatam kirtan, right? Not just, oh, I've come to the temple, now I should chant some rounds, now I should sing some kirtan, right? No, constantly, wherever he is thinking, how can this glorify Krishna? How can this be engaged in the glorification of Krishna, right? This is Krishna consciousness, right? So like this, satatam, right? And what do we find? Nitya yukta upasate, right? Or even we could add bhaktya as well, right? So what do we hear? Nitya yukta upasate. There's a constant dynamic engagement, right? Perpetually engaged. This is not the impersonalist is not a Mahatma, because they are not constantly nitya yukta upasate. They are not dynamically engaged in this yukta, in this union. This is an eternal union, but it is a dynamic one. What is being spoken about here is the back and forth of Krishna and his devotee. Nitya yukta upasate. This is not simply I have meditated and now I'm statically existing, right? This is the cowherd boys wrestling with Krishna, right? This is what is being mentioned here. And then lastly, mam, right? Mam is important here. Sometimes people will say, actually in a very technical sense, and I'm not being dogmatic here or fundamentalist, just in the technical philosophical sense, we do not actually have bhakti for anything else, right? We can only have bhakti for the Supreme Lord, because what is bhakti? As all of you nicely mentioned earlier, we are hearing about daivim prakritim, right? In the divine nature. What is the divine nature? This is the internal energy of the Lord. This is the internal energy. And what is the internal energy that's found in the Mahatmas? What is it?
Bhakti.
Bhakti, right? Bhakti Devi is that internal energy, and she manifests in the Mahatmas, right? She empowers the Mahatmas, right? The Mahatmas are imbued with Bhakti Devi. And because they are imbued with Bhakti Devi is an energy of Krishna, not an energy of anyone else. So you can be a Ram Bhakt, you can be a Krishna Bhakt, but when we say there are Durga Bhakts and all of those sort of things, technically, yeah, no, not technically. We get what you're trying to say, but technically, one can only have bhakti towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's all that's there. The nature of this we will discuss furthermore, because in the next few texts, which we'll discuss next week, we will begin to discuss the sort of people who are indirectly worshipping Krishna, and they will somehow, they will be broadening the ways we can legitimately say bhakti. But in a very strict technical sense, it is mam, right? Namasyantascha mam bhaktya, right? Krishna is saying mam, unto me, right? I am the object of kirtan. I am the object of bhakti. I am the object of all of these things. Okay, and so this is the nature of the Mahatma. Okay, we're 1 minute early, Mark. So you can all use that 1 minute wisely. Chant a round or something, a very quick round. Okay, the homework is please finish chapter 9. As I said, we're shooting through chapter 9, and if we have a bit of time, I'm hoping to have 1 week and we'll go a whole lot deeper into the 9th chapter, into some of the more esoteric implications of it, because it is such a wonderful chapter. I'm happy to, yeah. But finish chapter 9. I think next week we'll finish our quick go through of chapter 9, and then we'll do a loop, and then we'll go a little deeper into the chapter. Okay, are there any questions?
Hey, give us the open book essay questions, Prabhuji, so that we can start preparing.
So I'm thinking of giving them after we finish chapter 9. I just feel like we haven't gotten deep enough yet into these chapters. Oh, do you mean the marks? The marks I'll give next week.
No, not the marks for the next.
The questions, yeah. No, I'll give you your marks and I'll give you the questions at the same time. But I'm hoping to do those after we finish chapter 9. I just feel like we haven't done enough yet where I would feel comfortable giving you the questions, because the rule technically is you have to hand it in 2 weeks after I give you the question, right? So I want to give it a little later. Yeah, I was just being a little flexible with module 1. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'll stop the recording.